Welcome to the Fragrance Files.
Welcome to the Fragrance Files.
So I think the first time that scent felt spiritually significant to me was when I got a chance to really pay attention at being around the fire in a Mayan ceremony, right? There's copal that is actually offered, there's jaggery, there's sugar, there's flour, sometimes there's bread. And so the smell and there's wax, right? Because we also offer candles. So the moment all of that starts and the fire gets big, you start feeling that mix of all of these scents. And it's just that literal connection, right? Between the earth, the elements, but also the world and the underworld, the connection to the ancestors. So I think definitely that in an aware way. I feel like as a child, now that I look back, I can say, oh, when my grandma, would put agua florida on me or put cologne on me, or those moments, right? Like taking a bath as a kid, like I can see that being kind of spiritual in a way as well, but like it wasn't intentionally spiritual.
Welcome. Thank you so much for joining us. For those who don't know you, can you please introduce yourself?
Yeah. First of all, thank you for having me. My name is Paula Morales, and I'm an artist. I'm a maker. I am a Mayan Timekeeper, and I'm a perfume enthusiast and perfumery student. So that's a little bit about me.
And IRL friend, which I'm very excited to have you here.
Paula and their partner are also known as the Pitaya Collective, if you have seen their social medias.
Welcome. So let's jump in. Was fragrance already part of your spiritual practices growing up, or did that connection emerge later on for you?
I mean, I grew up Catholic. Well, that's a big stretch. I mean, my dad was Catholic, and I would go to church with my dad. My mom wouldn't come to church. So yes, in the sense that there was always frankincense, in the church and that kind of thing. I also became Seventh-day Adventist because I was always at my neighbor's house. So they
Okay.
adopted me and I would go with them. I never really knew I was practicing though. But but I feel like maybe around the house there was incense. Not really. I think that's the short answer.
It's funny when we talk to fragrance in like spiritual practices, especially as kids, because you kind of lack the awareness of like the historical weight of any religious practice. But like Catholics do have a lot of incense. Um, a lot of religious practices have a lot of various forms of incense. But then, like, I grew up Pentecostal in the South, and they don't have that same fragrant attachment. So, like, when I think of scent and religion in my childhood, I think of like moist carpet, like dusty
Youth group.
church, right? And like old trailer, because our youth group was in a trailer, and like it's a very strange association, and I think it's part of why I'm so enamored by church incense fragrances now, is because I don't have any of that attachment.
Yeah.
Well, my school was initially opened for missionary kids back in the 60s, and in the 80s it was opened for everybody. So my parents put us both in that school to learn English, but so it was Baptist meets Pentecostal sometimes meets Lutheran sometimes. So I really grew up in a mix of all kinds of religions, but spiritually my grandma, she used to have an altar, my mom's mom, and she had a Jesus, she had a Buddha, and she believed in a lot of like mudras and things that came from India. So she always had, a glass of water, and she always did have incense. I don't think I understood what was going on. I just found it fascinating, because there was all these little knickknacks on top of her altar, and I'd be like, cool, like, but I had no idea.
What kind of memories and emotions do scents unlock for you that others don't?
Um, it's just immediate. Just today, my aunt and uncle were here, and we went into a store, and it smelled a mix between like plastic and the new smell. And I remember telling my aunt, I was like, "Hey, this is what the States smell like. Because when people would come to the States and it would come and back and would bring a gift or something, it would smell like that new, like, and I said, I'm like, the longer I've lived here, the less I can notice that smell because now I live in it, right? But
Yeah.
that's like that connection of like, of newness. It's just like a moment, like, you know, it's so connected to flavor too. So like food, right? Like it
Mhm.
reminds me of a certain time in my childhood. I remember we had a tent that was like always put away. We rarely camped, but the smell of that tent was so specific. And it was like very similar to the box where I kept my Barbies, right? So I don't know. It's like time travel in its own way.
Yeah.
I really, really love it. It's just one of those things where you could just be like, ah, come smell this. And then, and we're all going to be transported to different places, which I think that's like so freaking magical.
I love those moments when I smell something and it unlocked a memory, something that I haven't thought of in decades. And it happened to me recently with a bottle. I had known that I really liked Jasmine Yucatan from Diaz and Durga. I knew it was really like the only one that I liked, and then I got it and I got it on skin and smelled it just at home and lived with it for a little bit. And I'm like, oh, I love this because it reminds me of making pasta and bread in the
Mm,
kitchen with my grandfather as a kid. And like I had not thought of doing that, and it was such a weekly routine for so much of my childhood that I think I blocked it out because it was a little traumatizing with my grandfather like yelling, "Oh, you're not doing it right." So it was interesting that it's something I had smelled multiple times, and then there was just that light bulb moment. But I love when that happens, and I think it's one of those things that makes me keep coming back to fragrance as almost like a vehicle um to deconstruct my past in a way.
yeah, and
Yeah.
sometimes it's like what you were sharing right now. It's like so happenstance. I
Mhm.
remember falling in love with the Fuegia perfume, the Apis muscara one, which is honey, and it's just a very straightforward honey without being cloying. It's just very photorealistic, and I actually got a bottle of it and loved it. And then as time went by, this something very similar happened where I was like, wait, this smells like something I know. And it smells exactly like my grandfather's pipe tobacco. Like exactly. And today that my uncle was here, I was like, please smell this. Because of course I had to have him smell a whole bunch of fragrances. And I was like, please smell this. And he did. And he's like, oh, it smells like honey. And I'm like, does it not smell like my grandfather's pipe? And he's like, oh my God, yes, it's like exactly the same. And I was like, it's like so crazy. And there's no tobacco note in there, right? At all. But it's like, oof.
Yeah, there's those moments too where it's not even a conscious recognition. Like you smell something and you're like, whoa, where is this taking me? Like I'm having this very strong moment. I know I was sitting in a doctor's office in like the waiting room, and this lady pulled out a bottle, this like little pink bottle of Bath and Body Works lotion. I don't know what the scent was specifically, but she went to put it on, and like as soon as she popped the cap on it, I was like, I remember this. Why do I remember this? And I had to like sit there with it for a minute. And I remembered when my aunt died, it was the first dead person I'd ever seen. And my family felt it was very important to see the body and say goodbye. And I remember my grandmother was rubbing lotion on her hands. And it was like distinctly whatever that fragrance was. And I was like, oh, okay. That's why
Yeah.
I don't like this lotion. Um, yeah, we're heading into some cool territory here, though. Um, across cultures and history and time, scent is tied to mourning and to ritual and to burial and remembrance. Why do you think fragrance and death have coexisted?
I don't know, like from a technical and just observational standpoint, I think because of the way it's preserving, right? I think of the Egyptians, I think of the Mayans, the Incans, um, and also just because I think death wasn't seen as something bad. I think that's just a very modern thing. Like death was seen as a continuation. It was most oftentimes seen as a privilege, at least in great parts of the Mayan culture, right? you would offer yourself and continue in the other side. And so I think scent is a vehicle, kind of like what we were saying earlier, right? Like it's just a vehicle that almost dresses up that intangible connection, because I think that our connection to death and the unseen and the intangible is hard, because we are a society or a species that wants to be convinced of existence. And so when we can't see something, there's no proof, right? How can we tell, right? So when we have scents that are connected by association or by ritual or whatever it may be culturally to situations that are connected to death, then we're like, oh. And then something really cool that I was talking to a friend recently about is that there used to be the Greek fumigations, for example, right? Because it is known that a lot of the incenses that are burned are also have calming effects. Like Boswellia serrata, which is the scientific name for frankincense, is an anti-inflammatory. It does calm. So by having these huge places full of this smoke, people would calm down. So when you are in an erratic moment of expelling emotions, being able to chill, and being able to chill the whole population all at once through ritual, you know. I think about the Colosseum, right? And where they would throw flowers in the arena because the arena would soak up all the blood and the place smelled really bad. So sometimes it was to mask. We think about Versailles, right? Like, so, but it's always been connected to death, right? Because there's no life without death.
Yeah. Do you think that scent changes the way we process absence?
I do. I think it's a key aspect to integration, right? It's a key aspect to integration from the like energetic and maybe even psychological kind of way, right? Of actually analyzing and integrating our emotions in our life. But also, I feel like what we just talked about, the lotion with your aunt, it's, I truly believe that our energy doesn't die, that our soul doesn't die. So to me, that story is like, oh, your aunt was saying hi, right? So it's like, it's beautiful to make that connection. And I think Mark Maron, who's the comedian, his partner died recently, and so in his stand-up he was saying, you know, some people say that our dead come in birds, and so I have all these birds on my deck, but how do I know which of my dead is which bird? And can I tell them to not shit on the deck, please? Anyway, so there's stories that we tell ourselves, but then there's also these connections. Like, this literally smelled like that moment. Like, that's not superficial. That's not something you made up. It actually happened. And knowing that apparently memory is something that we forget the more we remember is mind-blowing, because then our memories pretty much don't even exist, right? So
Yeah.
I think
Malleable.
scent is that like kind of like whiff, literally, because it's also so volatile, quite molecularly. So it's like the fact that, oh, I get this whiff of whatever, and then it's gone forever. It's never going to be the same spray. It's never going to be the same composition. It's just literally the personification of a fleeting moment, right? Of again, life and death, right?
Yeah, I think there is something to be said about absence and fragrance. Um, to anyone who has lost a parent, I think, it's a really complicated grief process.
Mhm.
It doesn't matter what your relationship was. And I remember after I lost my mom, the first time I smelled honeysuckle, like real honeysuckle, I became very emotional because it was just that association of like sitting on the porch with her and like the conversation and the silence with that scent then changed the association, and it had to take time to become accustomed to that absence and to that silence with that scent.
Yeah, I find myself after losing my dad having a lot of scent aversions of things like there's certain soapy scents that I have a hard time smelling because they remind me of like the harder months of like taking care of him and cleaning him. And those scents, because I those are not memories I want to remember. So I'm struggling when those come up in scent, whether it be, body care products or fragrances. But then there are other fragrances that I use for comfort when I want to remember him from my youth, like lilac fragrances, like I've mentioned before, or gasoline fragrances, like I've mentioned before. But it's amazing how it's become a tool for me to feel connected and to kind of replace some of those bad memories from the end with my youth and when he was young and healthy and thriving.
Yeah, it's the first time that, as you both share this, that I think about fragrance and its volume, but not
Hmm.
like scientifically, but what you were saying, loud and silent. My mom, she would get migraines a lot. So very rarely would she wear perfume. She really liked verbena. She really liked citruses. And I think it has to do with them being volatile and so them leaving really quick. But to me, it's more of like, I don't know. I'm so enthralled with objects and places and moments. So it's not just her as like her humanity, but it's more of like,
Hmm.
when I fry onions to put in the black beans, I'm like, that smells like my grandma's house on a Saturday night. Like, and that encompasses like everything, right? And I'm in my grief process in the part, I think it's 13 years this year that my mom passed suddenly. Rude. And she, I'm at peace with it. I actually am able to remember her joyfully, and I am able to also be very grateful because I understand that if she wouldn't have passed, a lot of other connections wouldn't have happened. And so
Hmm.
that moment of transformation, right, that took a lot. I barely talked to my dad, and now we're like friends, like all these things opened the stage for, I think, other sense too, right? Of like, one thing that doesn't change, I don't think, worldwide is the smell of wet dirt, right? For example. So that same smell, the geosmin, is going to be universal, and then, etc. I could go on forever. So I'm going to pause.
I think it's really magical the way that, I mean, it's documented and studied the way that scent is a gap, a bridge between the physical and the psychological. But I really think one of the things we were talking about wanting to discuss in this episode was that fragrance can also function as that bridge between the physical and the psychological and the spiritual.
So I was born in Guatemala during the Civil War. There was a 36-year civil war in Guatemala, and it brought along a whole bunch of things. And including, there was more than 45,000 disappeared people. Interesting fact is that before the Central American, South American wars, there really wasn't, the word disappeared in that sense didn't exist because, you couldn't disappear, but it became a word. And speaking about my grandparents, there was this photo of my aunt there, and nobody talked about her and nobody said who she was. She was one of the 45,000 disappeared. And I think I now understand, my grandmother's connection to spirituality, right? Or the secrecy of things, of like things you can't talk about in certain areas because it's dangerous, which then become these silences that we replicate. I think there's that connection, right? Again, that the mourning, the silence, which can also, like, silence can be imposed, but it could also be a pause, right? So I think that connection. So I was the firstborn after her disappearance. The peace accords were signed in 1991. I was born in 1983. And that's also kind of funny because you can't sign peace, right? Like, how do you do that? So I think there's always this connection, in my perspective, as scent being a doorway, right? Scent being a doorway, an invitation, a portal to possibility, but not in a sense of kumbaya, but more of in a sense of freedom can have a smell, but like going back to the rain and the geosmin, the dirt is still gonna smell the same, right? You can be celebrating life when it rains because there was a baby that was born and brought into the earth, the rain is going to smell the same, right? You can be celebrating death because you're bringing the body back to the earth. And so I think it all goes back to ritual, right? To ritual, to witnessing. I think it has to do with evidence. It has to do with witnessing what you shared. We need to see the body because we need to know what happened. And I don't know if for me, it was helpful that I didn't see my mother's body because I have a photographic memory. And so I chose not to see her body. And so some part of my existence feels like she's on a trip somewhere, which she very much probably is, right? So, yeah.
There is I think there's a deep psychological drive for us as humans to know. And there is a finality, I think, to seeing a loved one when their body is no longer them. And we talked a lot about that in one of my death and the afterlife classes. I was going to be a like funeral practitioner. That my religious studies background goes into like death and the afterlife, mourning practices, things of that nature. Surprise to no one. But when you look into like death practices around the world, there is this element of needing to come to terms with that separation of the person and the body. And it's only really when you get into like the Victorians, of course, that like modern funeral practices start to develop in this idea of preserving and to hold on to and to keep someone as they were.
No, I remember going to the Museum of Anthropology in Mexico City, and there is a replica of the first burial. And I remember seeing it and saying, this is what started everything, right? This is the beginning of the end because it's the first time where we decide to remember, right? Before we're nomads and we're like, well, grandma died. Cool, let's keep on going. And now it was like, no, like, there needs to be this evidence. There needs to be this place as we become sedentary, right? There needs to be that remembrance and that honor. And so it's just wild to me. I was like, this is that moment, right? When we decide to start creating all of these rituals, what would have happened if this wouldn't have happened, right? If we would have just moved on.
So Josh, we definitely overlap in that that aspect of you wanting to work in the funeral business. Growing up, my mom was a cosmetologist in a funeral home, so I spent much of my childhood waiting for her to get off of work and nearly every day after school sitting in the funeral home watching her do makeup
Aw.
and um seeing all the funerals taking place. And so it was great to see different cultures also interacting in that space. But even still to this day, like, the whole idea of how we do it and how we, sit in a room for, nowadays I feel like it's less, but back then it was like sometimes over a week of people sitting there, and I'm like, why? Why do people do this to themselves? And I distinctly remember all the sense of everything that was going on. And it's it makes me think very differently and like in the traditions that my family has built in celebrating someone's life rather than feeling, this overwhelming sadness. And like the Italians are like they're known for like jumping in the casket, screaming, crying sort of thing, you know? But I also almost worked in a morgue doing photography for medical photography. So I'm so glad I didn't take that path. And I don't know if I could have handled it long term.
Well, as a kid, when you asked me what I wanted to do when I grew up, I wanted to work at a circus. So I'm kind of glad that didn't happen, even though I'm still kind of clowning around anyway, right? But
Yeah. When we think about the way, I mean, there's obviously the very physical element of death that we've been discussing, but how do your spiritual practices shape the way you think about memory and ancestry?
So as a Mayan timekeeper, I do have a relationship with the Mayan calendar daily, right? I know what day it is, I know what cycle we're in, etc. And that in juxtaposition with the Gregorian calendar, I'm able to, you know, map out who is doing what in the tree. I spend a numerous amount of years working with my family tree. I started with 30 people and I have more than 4,500 now. In a means to not just work with the family tree, but work with kind of family constellations and metagenealogy, kind of finding out what was going on in the past, why were things passed on, also speaking energetically, starting from names to sicknesses to deaths, etc. And so to me, we have an altar at the house. We're always burning candles as offerings. We're always offering smoke, offering food, offering. So there's that connection of, you know, and I know everyone that I have birth dates close to me and my family, what their Mayan energies are. So then I'll be like, oh, you know, this is my grandma. So this means this and this means that. And so there's a lot of interweaving and interconnecting behind the scenes, but also in that relationship of like, oh, it was my mom's birthday. She really liked this dish. Let me cook it and we're going to eat it. So there's those actual ritual of let's do ceremony. Let's just light a candle, change the water, set some alcohol. And then the day to day, like I really believe that life is a ceremony, right? It's not just a place you go to in certain moments. So there is that connection and that ancestors are with us and live through us. The older I get, the more I see my mom in my face, which is very creepy. But that's how genes work, children.
So one of the things you've mentioned in our conversations was working on your archive and how that led you into fragrance. Can you talk about the archive and what it meant to engage with your history in that way?
Yeah, of course. So like I was saying earlier, I was the firstborn out of 9 on my maternal side. So I was loved by everyone because everyone I think was tired of mourning. And so I was very loved by my grandparents and my parents. And I started getting a lot of oral history. Like I grew up around them. I would go between my hometown and their city, and I would hear all these firsthand accounts. And when I turned 14, I was like, okay, what happened to this lady? Like we need to figure it out. So I started like recollecting. She used to be a poet, so like, you know, her writings, like newspaper clippings. I started kind of asking around, and so that became the early stages of me then becoming a photographer, right? I was shooting a lot of bands and just like rock stuff and punk and whatever. And then I actually became a documentary photographer, worked at some newspapers, and actually covered some of the clandestine cemeteries during the war with photography. And so my grandfather shot photos, my mom shot photos. And so with time, I started photographing. I turned the lens on our family. So it was like, oh, my grandfather, he got dementia. So I started documenting his journey. And I actually did this show where I was like, it's crazy because we want to keep her memory alive, but he's losing his memory. How does this work? Like, what is memory? And so I photographed him. He then passed. So I continued to photograph the same places, but him no longer in the places, right? Then my grandmother got sick, so her getting sick. And then my mom and my grandmother visiting the cemetery. Then my grandmother dying and my mom mourning her mother on the bed where there was portraits of her mother before. Photographing the absence of the house. Then when all of us came together to empty the house. And so at that point, many people in the family didn't really care about the objects and the stuff. And to me, I was like, I need to keep this. Like, I need to find out all these things. So I took 2 huge suitcases and with everyone's permission, I started taking documents and books and bits and pieces. And then after that, I started interviewing people because on my dad's side, my grandfather left when my dad was 3. So there was all these stories, but I was like, who was this guy? And so I started finding who his brother was. And anyway, to tell you, I had the WhatsApp number from the guy in the tiny town in Italy that worked at a registry. Because I was in WhatsApp, like, I'm like, hey, can you look at this registry? Anyway, so I started mapping all of these things, like interviewing people that went to school with my aunt, reading the letters and being like, okay, this happened here, because my family didn't want to talk about it. That's the thing. Like, people don't want to talk about it. And so then my mom passed away. So then it was like photographing that, her funeral, photographing my dad watching soccer, wearing all black, photographing the bed undone only on one side, then photographing her closet and her stuff. And so I became a keeper of stories, but also a keeper of things. Like, I have my grandma's lipsticks, right? Like, I have my grandfather's glasses, like the shirt my aunt was wearing in that photo that was in the living room. And so to me, this is ongoing for more than 25 years. And to me, this is going to be a multimedia book. And I am a photographer. I'm an illustrator. I do analog visuals. I have all these mediums. And so to me, one day I was like, scent. So how could I not thought about scent in connection to memory? Like, how have I not thought about that? And so I was like, I remember Heather, right? I got to have a meeting with her, and I was like, oh my God, like, this is where I'm at. We connected through tarot and other cool things. And I was like, what do I do? Like, what do you, and she's like, why don't you learn it? And I was like, that's a great question. And I was like, that's a great idea, because I don't know. At this point, I think I had already taken a nose training class with Arabelle Zaccardi, and I've always loved perfume. Like, that's like, a given, but I was like, oh my God. And so that freaking put me in a rabbit hole where I now have an organ with more than 100 aroma chemicals, and I have made lots of mixes, because the idea then was, this is my vision. My vision is for this to be like a big book that's inside of a box, and you, let's say, open to a random page and it'll say, oh, tell you a story. Or you can actually pull out a letter that's like a replica from the archive. You can read it, and then it'll say like spray bottle number 3, and listen to, I don't know, playlist number 2, because there'll be interviews that go, or a song, or maybe like you're listening to the rain fall on water while you're reading the letter and smelling the thing. And so that's the ongoing, because I'm always like, you can smell scent, but then I'm also like, what does scent sound like, right? So I'm like, I'm on this ongoing also journey of like, how can I use the analog synthesizers to use the water as a catalyst to listen molecular. Anyway, so there's all these like interwoven parts of the archive. I think it's like a living system. And to me, I feel like I am not having children. I feel like almost like the tree ends here in my side of the family. It ends here. So I almost feel like, those shrimp that clean the tanks. Like, I feel like that's my role. Like, I'm cleaning, organizing, and then I want to give that back to the family. Be like, here, this is, and not just to my family, but to anyone, because anyone that has gone through grief, anyone that has gone through sadness or happiness or love or hunger is going to see themselves in that. So it's not about me and my family. It's a bigger, conversation.
It sounds like an incredible, incredible project. I can't wait to see what you do with it. I trust anything in your hands as somebody who has consumed the products that you've been making, your cards, your tote bag that comes with me everywhere, seeing your art. It's smelling some of your early mods. I have full faith that this is going to be incredible.
Thank you.
It's very interesting that when you talk to your photography work, particularly again around absence, this study of absence, my family kept alive the practice of death photography up until my mom died in 2021.
Oh, wow.
And when after my mom died, my dad had to go into assisted living, and my brother and I had to go through their belongings. My mom was more than a bit of a hoarder. So I ended up with these boxes and boxes and boxes of photos of people I didn't know, and it was like a several month process, taking time to go through this binder today. And a reoccurring question with my brother and I, and it became half joke but also very real, was who is this person and are they alive in this photo? Um, and it was an interesting thing because initially I found it very very strange, but like as I worked through my own grief, I started to understand it more. That idea of keeping something, having something to keep, having something to witness, um, in a way, creating an archive. Of course, then when I moved, I had to go through and I'd be like, okay, but if I don't know these people, I probably don't need these photos because there's no one to tell me who they are anymore.
Did you get rid of them?
Yeah. I mean, I kept, I have a single box now of family photos. My mom's side of the family, my dad's, my brother and I. Um, and then when Brian and I were splitting and starting the divorce process, I had to separate our family photos. And the general consensus was if it looked like Cuban, if it was like sepia toned and golden and beautiful and beachy, it was Brian's. If it looked like Appalachian horror, it was my family. And that was how we separated all the photos.
Oh my
Um,
god.
so,
But it's funny because I went through this phase of like, so I did documentary. I thought I was going to work at AP or EFE, like that was like my goal. When I started photography school in San Francisco, I was already 27 and I had been doing it for years. But at some point, I remember when Photoshop was being taught back in the 1300s, and I was like, no, because I was a documentary photographer. Everything had to be measured in camera, like da 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 da. And then I was like, dude, like the industry's going to leave you. So I was like, cool. I learned Photoshop. And that's where shit hit the fan because I was like, wait, I can edit video in Photoshop. So I started editing video with layers and then I was like, wait. And so I was enthralled with death all the time. And so tintypes. I started collecting tintypes. And I started making these layered collages on the tintypes and making this fantastic, like I have the hair sisters, which are these ladies with just like huge hair coming out, or these bunny heads with like, and then I was like, wait, why am I doing collages? Why don't I just shoot this in real life? So I would get models and then I would have like, I would get the backdrop of the studio and I would make a huge paper boat and then shoot on location and then edit that. But to me, like all of that, daguerreotypes, tintypes, death photography, and everything that's connected to that, like locks of hair, teeth, like there's just such like it's weird and gross a little bit, I guess, but to me it's just so fascinating. Like imagine how beautiful having this braided hair ring. Like now we're like, oh, they're dead, like meh, like
the Victorians,
what are
man.
we doing? Yeah, keeping up with the Victorians. I think that should be another podcast.
Listen, me and Liz, from the Vapor Parade, have been talking about how desperately we want to find a full set, and I forget the name of them, but they were these basically like
Chatelaines.
little, yes, oh my god, from the Victorian era, and they were. Have you ever seen them, Josh?
Hmm.
They had like, I mean, like a perfume bottle and a notebook and your makeup and your key, and I'm like, God, we've always just loved our little trinkets,
Liz
haven't
was
we?
screaming in excitement when we were at the perfume passage because they had that place is mind blowing, but they had a collection
Yeah.
of chatelaines that
And I found one
pristine
recently.
condition.
I found one on Mercari recently, and it was, I think, like $1,300, and I was like, oh my god, what do I have to do to budget to have this right now?
Listen, I. It's funny when you said like we all love our little trinkets because when you were talking about wanting to find one of those, I flashed back to you. I had a dog named Bosco. Um, Previously, I had to put him down in 2022. And his name was Bosco, and I was just after that bidding on the reliquary of Saint Bosco, and I
Oh
wanted to
my
put
god.
his tooth in the reliquary, and I thought it was very meta. But like, what is a relic if not just a religious trinket?
Well, yeah, and even cathedrals in the Spanish colonies, like it wouldn't be. I don't know if this is still a thing. I actually want to figure it out. But in order for it to be a cathedral, there had to be saint bones under it. So Guatemala City used to be in this valley, and there was a big earthquake in 1915. So they had to relocate the entire city to where it's now. And so the old city is called Antigua Guatemala or Antique Guatemala. And so that church is no longer a cathedral. It's just a church because they took the Saint Bones from under to take to the other church. So, and if you go to Santa Catarina, or what, that's her name, in Siena, where it's just her head, or the finger of San Francisco de
Yeah.
Asís, I love medieval
Love a relic.
times, dude. They're just
Yeah.
let's cut that saint's tongue, we need to display that.
Well, yeah, I
That's
mean, and then
wild.
not even getting into like the practice of anchorites, another medieval Catholic practice. They would take often women who were mentally ill, who had visions and sights and sounds, and they would actually bury them in the walls of the church while they were making
God, I
it,
don't
and they
think
would
I
leave
knew
a
this.
single brick open to feed and water them so they could be a channel for the divine. They were an anchor for the church, the anchorites. And then eventually, when they did pass, they would just seal that last brick.
Dude.
Um,
Is that what Pink Floyd was talking about? Wow.
Well, this is one of my missions for when I'm in Italy, because also grew up Catholic, and my grandfather built a church in Calabria, and his dying wish was that we would take his ashes and put his ashes to be built into the wall of the church. Logistically, it's incredibly difficult to take over an entire box of ashes. But when they passed, we had gotten our my mom has the big box, and then each of the grandkids got a small urn of each of my grandparents. And so it's my mission while I'm there, with the 12 hours that I have of free time, to meet up with some member of my family to get these tiny boxes to them to put in the church in Calabria.
That's beautiful.
Yeah,
it's quite a journey.
it is. It
Nonno.
Yeah.
is.
Did you call him
Yeah.
Nonno?
No, he was Poppy.
Papi.
Yeah,
Nice.
Nanny and Poppy.
Speaking on churches and cathedrals and all of the fun things, do you think fragrance changes the emotional or spiritual quality of a space?
Absolutely. Some Baccarat Rouge, for example, will definitely make me leave. For example, some Dior Sauvage, I'm like, bye. But if I get like a smoky closet perfume with some birch tar and some pignon, I'm like, hey. No, yeah, of course. I think something we haven't talked about that is really connected to everything is intentionality, right? I think, we could burn a tire and say it's a ritual, right? But like, what are we doing? Why are we doing it? I remember being really young and going through photography books with one of my best friends and being so pissed off that the photos were not focused. And I was like, how are these published? Like, what the hell, And many years later, I was like, oh, because there's an actual intention behind all of these people's work. And so I think the same thing with scent, right? I feel like, what is our connection and our intention with what we are doing, whether it be a ritual, whether it be, I'm not Catholic, but I will be respectful in a Catholic church. I do understand it's a different vehicle for spirituality, right? The same with a mosque, or with a Buddhist temple, right? I feel like it goes back to honor, to respect, and we can't respect and honor the dead if we're not respecting ourselves and those that are alive. So I totally think that it changes. And I go back to that fumigation thing that I talked about earlier, right? Like, I think that's so trippy to me. Or the oracle, what you just said about the church, I think about the Oracle of Delphi, right? There's all these accounts where she was getting all these fumes from the inside of the earth, right? Because why would a woman channel? And it's these things where it's like, you can't really make these accounts up, right? why were people continuing to burn frankincense, right? Why were people continuing to use turmeric, or where did attars come from, right? Like when we look again at the mummies in Egypt or in Cusco, etc., like why were they using these things? It wasn't happenstance. There was an intention. There was a proven intention. It was a technology. When we think about technology, we oftentimes think only about machines, but we don't think about indigenous technologies, right? We don't think about oral tradition, and we don't think about scent inheritance, and how that is also connected to racism many times, right? How many people grew up being picked on because their food was stinky, or because they smelled bad or smelled different, but that's a lack of understanding, right? So I think the intention goes hand in hand with understanding that you might not understand something. That doesn't mean it is wrong or it is bad. And that is totally reflected in what we see in social media too, right? When people spray on a perfume for 3 seconds the first time ever and they decide it's horrible and they know nothing about it. They don't know the perfumer. They don't know the process. They don't know. So yeah, all to say, I do think that fragrance changes emotional or the spiritual quality of a space because you're preparing. It's like ushering.
For sure.
Yeah.
I think that immediately made me think of when we were chatting a couple days ago on rituals, and like when people hear the word ritual, they often think something very formal and they think something very old. But ritual is inherent to the human experience. We all have rituals that we do daily, and it's the intention that you go into a ritual that gives it spiritual significance. Making your bed daily is a habit, but if you make your bed daily with the intention of it starting your day, it becomes a ritual. And I think fragrance is such an interesting intersection where there are people who just put on a fragrance as a habit. But I think a lot of people in our discussions across the episodes of the podcast do have a daily ritual with their fragrance. When we talk about it being like an armor for the day or a protection for the day, what is that if not witchcraft? That's a ritual.
But also just in general, like I also think how it's connected to status, because I remember growing up in Guatemala and being a teenager and knowing all these people that owned really expensive designer fragrances, but they didn't really, they weren't opulent people, right? But it was this thing of like, oh, but I wear Carolina Herrera 212, or like I have Aqua di Gio, or like this, that, and the other. And so to me, I always thought that was interesting, right? It's like, I might not have money, but I smell really expensive. So that makes me, my intention is for you to fool you with that fragrance. Mm-hmm. And so, yeah, it's interesting. Yeah.
It makes me think, so you had posted a video very recently about, the longevity of a fragrance and why it really does not mean that much. And it came up in conversation. We were talking with Michael Nordstrand, and I've been thinking in my head that it's something that truly doesn't matter to me very much at all either, how long a fragrance lasts, because bringing a fragrance with me and taking moments throughout the day to reapply almost feels like a mindfulness break for myself, in the same way that it does in the morning when it's the first thing I do after dropping off the kids to calm down and do something for myself. It's the same throughout the day that I'm taking this moment to care for myself, to apply my fragrance and to connect with that and connect with my senses. So it's very much just, yes, do I want to smell good? Sure. But every time I do it, it feels like a moment where I'm caring for myself. And that's, what I want more people to think of. Like, the longevity is not everything. Use it in a positive way.
That's what Josh was talking about right now, right? The difference between ritual and not ritual, I think, is what you're saying right now. It's care, right? And I think, to me, the widespread lack of wanting to learn, because I wouldn't say ignorance. I think ignorance is when you don't know something and you don't know it. But I think all of these falsities that come along with like longevity equals quality, or for example, also the whole myth of maceration that people have created, when that's literally not what maceration is, but nobody wants to Google it or go to a library about it. So I think it goes back to care. Like, why? And if you have a curated collection, I don't care if you have 500 or 300 perfumes, it doesn't matter, but is it with care? Or is it because you don't want to be left out, right? Or is it because you have FOMO, right? Because I've seen firsthand people that are in debt that I'm like, where's the care to that, right? Like, so, and this is a balancing act in every aspect of life, right? How are we, and it's hard because nobody teaches us to adult, right? So it's like, you have to brush your teeth and take care of your skin and take care, and then if you have children, oh my God, that's a whole other layer. People are heroes. But, so I think it boils down to care, right? It boils down to care. It boils down to intention, which intention is care. It boils down to respect, right? Because what, you know, like you said, after I drop off my kids, that means you care that they're not smelling like that fragrance, or you thought about it. So there's a, you know, or when people are like, oh, I spray 50 sprays on me. And I'm like, that's great, but where are you going? Because if you're going to the gym, there's other people. So I don't know. It has to do with how we inhabit relationality. And in this era of broadcasting, I feel like it's very easy to feel disconnected and wanting to be connected through replicating versus through actual connection and care.
I fully agree. And I would also say that there needs to be an element of connection to the fragrance and where it's from. And this goes into, we've talked about it a few times on the podcast, you know, appropriation and appreciation, but also just an awareness. And like, I was very fortunate that in my job, I've had to travel extensively. And my thing was trying to find a perfume brand from wherever I was traveling. So like in Mexico City, I got to go to Ginu. I got to see, you know, one of the most beautiful boutiques I've ever been to, but they have the raw ingredients that go into each of their fragrances surrounding it. And you really get to understand, as they talk about each of the ingredients that's in a perfume, why it's significant to it being a Mexican perfume, whether it's the types of tobacco and where they're from, or the copal. And then that's also true of other brands like Paramsara, you know, the Bodhi. It talks a lot about incense in that context and not a Catholic context. There's like a trueness and an authenticity to the ingredients that I don't have to be part of those cultures to appreciate that they are significant. And if I'm going to wear this perfume and enjoy this perfume, I need to be aware of that context and that weight.
And that to me opens another portal into also the way things are harvested, you know, who harvests them, the way things are distilled and how they are processed, right? You know, Shinu is a great example because we also have master perfumer Rodrigo Flores Ru behind it. So you know it's going to be masterpieces and it's very well curated in that sense, but it's very culturally significant for Mexico, right? I think about white sage and I think about this beautiful poet and scholar. His name is Bayo Acomolafe. And so white sage is over harvested. It's an indigenous plant. And there was a moment where I think even Sephora was selling white sage, right? And so all these people were like, oh, but that's a close practice, like this, that, and the other. And he said, has anybody asked the sage how she feels? And so that goes back to in my opinion, of relationality, right? How are we having relationships to the land, right? How are we connecting to the elements? How are we inhabiting our body? When we go through these big transitions, like we talked about, the death of our parents in a way or another, we need to call ourselves back, right? We need to call ourselves back. And it is very easy to enact and act certain things without having to confront them. But I think that when we understand that you need more than 400 metric tons of rose petals to be able to distill an essential oil that is this big, you might have an understanding on how insane that is. And then you ask yourself, where's the rose being planted? What does that soil look like? Who's taking care of that soil? Who's nourishing the soil? Roses are one of the most finicky plants out there. They get sick by just looking at them. So imagine having that successful harvest of 400 metric tons. Like, that's mind-blowing, right? Again, I'm just gonna plug Arabelle Sicardi's book. Everybody that is into fragrance, you should read that. that
Absolutely.
opens your eyes and your mind. And the way it's written, it's neurodivergent friendly. Like, she did a great job with that, or they did a great job with that. I think, ask ourselves, right? Like, what performance are we putting in? Because I think there's a difference between performance and ritual. And I think it's very easy to just fall into the performance of like, oh, but I need to look a certain way. Oh, but I need to be a certain way. Oh, but I'm too big. I'm too small. I'm too loud. The more you lean into yourself, and as corny as that may sound, as cringe as that may sound, the more you're going to understand the observation of your relationship to what surrounds you. Like, I think about textiles too. What are we wearing? And I'm not saying go buy some sheep and make your own wool, because good luck, right? But I was very like, I have a spot to garden now. Let me plant my food. I harvested a spoonful of black beans. So we have this idea that sometime before, everything was better. But we don't realize we're already in the future of what we were when we were asking those questions. So it's kind of saying we can't go to a before, right? But we can go to an after with an intention and understand that many of the things that are kind of suffocating us, quite literally and metaphorically, also have to do with colonial mindsets, right? But knowing that there's parallel realities that we are already creating, queer realities, indigenous and queer realities, like all kinds, right? You like designer? Go for it. But did you know that this smells like, the foot of a parakeet inside of a cave? And well, now you do, because that's what we like. You know what I mean? So I don't know. I feel like there's a beauty in between a rock and a hard place. In that pressure. Like, that's how diamonds are made.
I certainly agree. And thinking about kind of trying to package, we've talked about a lot of topics so far tonight. How do you feel like fragrance carries parts of people forward?
Again, I don't think it's people. I think it's encounters, right? Because I don't miss my mom's body. Like, I miss her essence, right? Like, so I think it's about, there's a specific plant that's called loroco that's only in Central America. When you boil that or you cook with it, it's so fragrant and green. Like, I can't explain that to you. You have to have that presence. So I think that's it. It brings presence, right? It brings presence. So it's like, I can get really meta with this, right? Like, it's like, do we even exist, right? Like, are we just smells? And I'm actually reading this book that Agustin Segers from Agar Olfactive, they're amazing, told me to read.
Love
It's
them.
called We the Bacteria. Oh my God. Everyone should read this book too. It literally poses that bacteria are the first architects, right? Because they were, and they are, and they continue. And it goes into how we pollute, right? But it says, how do we pollute through bacteria? Like, have we thought that going to the moon, we're bringing bacteria from the earth, and how bacteria are thriving in nuclear sites, how our own gut has its own microbiome, and if we live with other people, our colonies of bacteria are connected to the people we live with. And so I remember thinking, I'm so hungry. Are you? Or is it the microbiome in your body, right? Like, all the the small bacteria that live on your face and your hair. And so it's this thing of like, is humanity like about presence and essence, or is it about absence? Right? Because I feel like, and I always say, speaking about ancestors, I always say this to people, like, honor the people that are alive. Go hug your aunt and your uncle. Go freaking hug everyone that's here. Call them up, see how they're doing. Because everyone's like, oh, I like really like love my ancestors. It's like, yeah, bitch, but you're not like honoring those that are alive. Right? So it's like, when we think about scent, I'm like, maybe we're just floating clouds of microbiomes of fragrance, and that's what we're connected to. But it's like kind of like the sillage, right? Like, it's like you need to be gone to actually present. Like, I can't miss you if you're here.
Yeah.
Oh man, that's got to be said at someone's funeral from the fragrance community. Their sillage will be smelled long after they've left the room.
Maybe the three of us can start a company where we actually just write. It's a mix of both of y'all growing up in these, in the mortuary business, and then we could just be like, we will write fragrance only, though.
Yeah. I mean, I am ordained. I've done weddings and funerals, so.
Oh my goodness. So this makes me to connect it to a completely, odd place, but I listened to a lot of true crime podcasts. And I was listening to one on Casey Anthony's daughter. And I had no idea this detail of the case that they had actually used I forgot the mechanism, but to capture the scent and the molecules in the air of her car to show that there was chloroform present and all these other things that mean the presence of a decomposing body being in the car. And it was such this odd moment for me of thinking of scent in this scientific way that like and it now that you said we are bacteria, like wow, this is who we are, this is who we become, this is what we leave behind without knowing it. But it was just a really fascinating connection that made me think of it, so I'm sorry for that major downer.
No. I think that ties in actually perfectly, because I think what you were saying is kind of similar to I think what they did with Cloud Reverie, where they got like the molecules. I've been super into the parallels between the aroma molecules that live inside of the human body and that are also used in fragrance. So we have aldehydes in our body, we have indole in our body, and indole to me is a molecule that actually sums up everything we're talking about. Because depending the dilution of indole, we have florals, right? Or we have decay. And fun fact is that indole is used to train cadaver dogs.
And I didn't know that.
And so literally it smells like the beautiful flowers that signify life and happiness and blooming, but it also signifies death. And when we decompose, more indole is produced. But we also have indole in our intestines as we speak. And so to me, I'm like, that one molecule literally traces life and death from beginning to end. And that is something that I'm really enthralled in at this moment. Instead of thinking about compositions, I'm thinking about decompositions. Did you see that? That was not planned. Anyway, and literally, like, instead of what happens when we mix them, what happens when we remove them? And I was able to get some cadaverine and some scatol in that search of smelling life and death and decomposition. I have still not smelled them, though. I'm because a thing that I want to merge is using spirituality as a vehicle paired with scent, so meditation, channeling, to then work with what needs to come out. So instead of saying, oh, I want this perfume to smell like this or this portrait to smell like this, it's like, okay, I'm going to go into meditation. I'm going to smell aldehyde 13. I'm going to smell, whatever, anisec something. And then see what emerges from that. So that's kind of where we're at. And I think it's exciting. I used to get these incredible anxiety attacks and I could not ride the bus. Like the bus would come, I could not get on. And I would do this for like 4 or 5 times until I had to realize I'm going to be late, and I would have to walk 2 hours across San Francisco because I could not manage to get on the bus. And so to me, this is before collecting perfume or anything. I realized that lavender and peppermint mixed together really helped ground me and really helped, again, bringing myself back into my body. That's kind of what I was talking about earlier, right? I think when there's a trauma experience, there's something happening at our energetic level, we leave our body. And as I started having my spiritual awareness, I started realizing that, I also used to have a whole bunch of migraines because my energy would go to my head. So it's like going back into your body, and scent literally does that. Also for neurodiverse people, right? There's oftentimes alexithymia, so you lose track of time, right? There's also, I forgot what it's called, but when you don't feel yourself in your body, So there are ways, there's also techniques, right? You know, you could also look at your finger and move it side to side. You're connecting your left lobe with your right lobe. So there is science to these things of using fragrance as a tool. And it doesn't have to be a fully developed perfume. It could literally just be a natural essence, or you know, I
Mhm.
don't know, I want to smell chocolate. That reminds me of being safe, right?
Yeah. In talking to scent and memory, I think that brings us to our closing ritual. Um, what fragrances are closest to memory for you right now?
I think copal is definitely one of them. Um, and I'm also really into colognes right now. It's weird. Like, I just want like a fresh pick me up, something that doesn't overwhelm me. So I've been really liking citrus stuff. And also I started infusing oils. So, and glycerites. So I've been using that also as like something to nourish myself, but also bring me back, calm me down, ground me, peppermint. Um, what herbs was I using? Pericon. Pericon is like a Guatemalan marigold. Um, but yeah, I feel like I'm shedding a lot in the sense that I think less is more right now.
What about you, Mishi?
Um, Closest to memory right now, I am living with um mango yuzu gasoline. So I reviewed this recently. This is from Boho Boko, and as I mentioned before, gasoline fragrances very much remind me of my father. And this like very specifically reminds me of being on Coney Island Beach in the summer times. And yeah, it's one of the few fragrances that I think really gets gasoline right and in a very wearable way. And it's not the fragrance that you would think somebody would use to remember their dead parent, because it seems so silly, but it struck me on such a deeply personal level, and I didn't expect it when I received it. So, yeah.
Yeah, I think I also kind of have a weird one. It's the new release by M. Haney, Ethernet.
Mm,
Um, it's a fragrance that the whole basis around the fragrance was the phrase touch grass. So it's supposed to be this like grassy element. But for me, I found it to be really amazing. My grandmother lived on a trailer on our property in the middle of nowhere in Georgia. And after she died, my parents sold the trailer and it was taken away. And I didn't have a lot of friends growing up. My grandmother was like my best friend all through like up to middle school. And I found myself in the summer, like just laying in the field where the house used to be to try to feel closer to her. And there's something about the way the vetiver and the grass in Ethernet play that remind me of that like long summer grass, the like dry, brown,
Uh-huh.
long grass. Um, and it just takes me back to that like peaceful, like laying in the sun, in the grass, trying to be close to an absence, actually. So it does kind of tie into the episode as well. Those were all of the questions we had for tonight. Um, Around death and memory and ritual and all of these great topics that I would not have wanted to talk to anyone else about other than you, Paula. So thank you for
yeah,
Thank
joining
you.
us today.
Likewise. Thank you
absolutely.
for having me.
Yeah, we love you. We hope to have you back again soon because I feel like there's so much more that we need to talk about.
Well, thank you. Can you let folks know where to find you and your goods online?
Of course. I'm the Pitaya Collective on Instagram and TikTok. And you could go at thepitayacollective.com to check out our services and our shop.
And if you've enjoyed this and any of our other episodes, it's time to plug in and say, please like and subscribe. It does really help us reach new audiences. So thank you so much, and we will see you next week.
Thank you. Love you. Bye.